This panel is the science of smokability. Now, a lot of people will say that we shouldn't be talking about smoking. There's not that much research on smoking. And the reason why is because we do demonize it, despite the fact that it is the chosen method for a majority of medical patients, especially daily consumers. Flower is always going to be my king. And I think this is a really exciting panel. So please go down the line. Let's start with Ashley. Introduce yourself. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about SOS before we start our first question.
Awesome. I'm Ashley Manning, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Cannabis Research Coalition. And we are here to talk about smoke science today, and appreciate you having me.
I'm Allison Justice with the Cannabis Research Center and Coalition.
I'm Dr. Marcus Roggen. I'm with Controlled Chemistry.
I'm Dr. Riley Kirk. I'm with the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy.
And I'm Dr. Miyabi Shields, and I'm also with NAP. So what we've been looking at with the science of smokability is how does the cultivation and post-harvest processing impact the quality of smoke? And there's all sorts of different metrics about smoke that we could be looking at, and we have barely begun to even scratch the surface. So we're really excited to get into it. We're all about looking at the chemistry of the smoke and the qualitative effects. It's about what's happening to the molecules. It's about how those molecules are interacting with our bodies and what it's making us feel.
Yeah, so Allison, we're gonna start with you. As a expert in horticulture and plant science, but also a cannabis consumer, how has your lived experience as a cannabis consumer changed the way you prioritize research or think about the objectives differently during your research projects?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. Being a cannabis consumer, I want consistency. I need consistency. And as getting into the industry, I found that is very lacking in everything. That's lacking in cultivation, post-processing, the whole gamut. And so through my years of doing research, cannabis research and cultivation, we've started to optimize these processes and really narrow down things. But as we move from the growing room to the drying room, we find even more inconsistencies in data and how we gather that data and what is curing and what is all this. And so as we put all this together, we thought, I'm a plant scientist, and I need to stay in my lane. And we need to bring in experts that can bring all of this together where we can really make sense of this, start optimization in cultivation and go all the way to when that smoke hits your lungs, what's happening and what are we really putting through.
I love that. And I think, as cannabis consumers, we can often tell when we're smoking a quality smokable product, but we don't have any metrics on what that means.
Right.
And to get those metrics is going to help cultivators and consumers find better and healthier products. I want to ask Ashley the next question, because you're also a cannabis consumer. And what is the impact of getting data on cannabis smoking to our community to use for advocacy purposes when we're sticking up for ourselves, whether that's in a courtroom or to our parents or whoever it is? What is the impact of data on this subject?
Well, being that smoking is the #1 preferred method of consumption, and with federal legalization coming around the corner, there are going to be many more potential risks, but also benefits. And without the research, we're never going to know what these risks could be. Hypothetical, we're going to wish the best that it could not be harmful to us, but from a medical standpoint, we need to know these risks. And so that's why more research is needed for it.
I absolutely think that from a reduction of harm standpoint alone, there's no reason why we shouldn't study something just because it's not the best method. So yes, if we were talking about inhalables, I do think dryer vaporization makes a lot of sense at lower temperatures where you're not having partial combustion or partial pyrolysis and you're not creating new different molecules through that process. Dryer vaporization is something that medically has this value where the risk profile in general is less, potentially, right? At least in terms of the number of compounds, because there's less compounds in dryer vaporizers. Now, the effects profile of that is very different. And so the idea that we would only study edibles, for example, the idea that we'd only study isolated products when that's not what's in the market doesn't make sense. And I think speaking to your point about the smoking and it being medicine and it being important, that we need to start understanding and valuing how we could improve the smoking experience as a medical experience. And that will help us to explain to other people better that it is a medical experience. I mean, it's not, the smoke is not equal. There's not equal things in all smoke. And not all smoke is made up of the same molecules. And actually, Marcus, this is something that I would love for you to speak on, is when it comes to the chemistry of smoking as a complex system, what would you have to say about the different molecules, the variables, the different things that go into the experience, whether it's a roach or a bowl or a bong, and like what is it chemically that's different, and what have you seen?
Yeah, so well, there's a lot to talk about, but I think the first thing to point out is smoking is a chemical process, chemical reaction process. So what is in the joint, in the pre-roll, is not what you consume. Well, we all know that the cannabis plant produces THC acid and CBD acid. But all those are decarboxylated to then form the intoxicating THC molecule and other neutral cannabinoids. So the plant, and in the joint, you have THC acid, but what you inhale is THC. So by definition, you already did a chemical synthesis or chemical reaction in the process of consumption. And that is not the only chemical change you see between the flower in the pre-roll and what you inhale. So all these COAs that have a static picture of a product that then undergoes another change when you inhale it is a very limited and incomplete picture.
And we're still going to be working on that for a while, because what we're even finding initially in this, I don't know if you want to speak to when we started doing it, why we're doing puff topography.
Sure. Yeah. So we recently completed phase 1 of Science of Smokability that was looking at the different water activities. But while Dr. Justice and Ashley and I were running these experiments, we're all cannabis smokers. We smoke a lot of weed, and we're looking at this machine take these puffs, and we're like, that's not how people smoke weed. That is not a representation of a cannabis consumer. So right after taking that first set of data, we said, we need to change something right now, because we're going to do this project for another at least 2 years. And as we keep collecting data, we want to make sure that the profile that we're using to replicate a cannabis consumer is actually based on cannabis consumers. And at various events this year, we have brought a small machine called the Puff Topography machine, where we are actually attaching joints and gathering community data from a diversity of people so that you can smoke weed, and we're recording how strong your pull is, how long your pull is, the distance between pulls, and then we're averaging that data, making a new method for our smoking machine, and now our robot is going to smoke a lot more similar to you than to a cigarette that it had previously been programmed to. So things like this of us being cannabis consumers and also doing the research allow us to see things like that, discrepancies in the research, and say, that's not really matching up with our experience as cannabis consumers. So as researchers, we have the ability to make that change so that the future research that we publish is as applicable as possible to the cannabis consumer.
And this is going back to why we want to do this quickly and in a different method or in a different way than is traditional research, is because the amount of time that it takes to do something like this, to design a new experiment, to get a custom machine built, is much more accelerated when we're doing it from a community perspective, and we can get that information faster. We can give that information back faster. So Ashley, can you speak from a business perspective, from the marketing and business perspective, about this timeline and research and what that means for our industry and what it does for us to be able to kind of turn around these things and do it faster?
Well, I'm going to keep preaching. Legalization is coming full force in some way, shape, or form. And without this fundamental research that is going to define what a quality cannabis smoke actually is going to impact regulations. And the speed of it right now is years. Universities who are studying cannabis, I don't believe any universities are studying cannabis smoke science like we are. So we need to move this as fast as possible, but ensure that we're doing it with quality metrics, such as ensuring the puff topography is accurate, because the puff topography in itself can impact the temperature of the smoke, which impacts the delivery of what's actually being delivered to a medicinal patient. That's impactful. And I don't know how we're going to be able to study this from a medical standpoint without actually understanding this foundational work.
You know, some people are double puffers. I was going to just bring up the different puff styles. Like it is interesting to know that there's a good amount of similarity in how we all inhale, and there's a good amount of difference. At least that's what we see so far.
I wanted to ask Ashley a follow-up question. Anyone else can contribute too, but how has the community, the cultivators, the people who have, who are growing so much cannabis in the industry, but maybe don't have the funds to do this type of research, what has been the response, the reaction from these cannabis companies?
That's a tough question, actually. I don't know if I should answer it honestly or not. We're here to speak the truth.
I'm German, I'm direct. I have an aggressive answer.
Aggressive answer.
We are, so in my case, I just yesterday again gave a presentation about the smoke research. We are an amazing magic trick that entertains the audience, and then they walk out and forget about it. It seems like it's really cool to hear, but the industry doesn't care. Like, they're like, oh, that's cool, that's amazing, someone should do that, but I'm not putting any skin into the game.
Do you think it's because the industry doesn't have to care right now, because there's no metric of quality, so there's nothing to incentivize people to create a quality product if we can't communicate that to the consumer?
There are way better ways to say that in a political way. So, but my quick one is, first, the industry, there are two phases. In the first phase, the industry is too busy making money to put any effort into research to make better products. And then there's a second phase where they're too busy losing money that they have no money left to do research to make better products. And it feels to me that we learned in children's stories that when there are good times, you start banking it. And when there are bad times, you use the savings. And like the whole industry was like, yay, let's buy Lamborghinis. And now everyone is bankrupt. Sorry.
No, it's not inaccurate in a lot of ways. I am going to take I am not disagreeing at all with any of that. I think that for me, what I see as a huge limitation in this field is public education, though. We have multiple generations of people who have been born and raised during the Prohibition. We have had years and years of brainwashing and propaganda, and we have a giant lack of our public education from the point where we're children. And people think that we're very radical for this belief, but we do think that people should be educated about not just cannabis, but all molecules. And the word drug is scary. I know even just saying that is probably going to get clipped out of all the reels, right? But like, I know that we don't want to talk about it, but drugs are medicine and food is drugs. And the understanding that we're building with our children and with the next generation about the knowledge of how to intentionally use molecules to modify your life, that's something that has been actually taken out, and that information has been taken away from a huge number of people for a very long time. And so we have to remember that still a majority of people are woefully uneducated. People do not know the vastness of the quality difference within the legal markets and within the black and gray. So I guess all gray. But the idea that that people who are purchasing cannabis in legal markets have a good understanding of quality, that's just simply not true. And that's part of the issue of why then there is no feedback for people to do the medical work, to do the quality work.
Yeah, maybe I have a different perspective, but I thought the feedback's been pretty positive overall. But
from the people.
Well, yeah, but I do think, some feedback we've got from the industry is people saying, oh, we did this research 10 years ago. We did this research 5 years ago. But where's the data? You never communicated that with anyone else. So a few companies have done that internally, but it's been left completely blindsided to the rest of the industry or to the consumer. And I think it's really the consumer who's losing here, because the consumer is the one, somebody who's willing to put money towards quality cannabis, but has no metric to know what quality cannabis is. We're not doing ourselves justice in this industry by leaving that gap open for us to interpret on our own.
You thought those interactions were positive?
I've had a lot of positive interactions.
I think it's really important to talk about this community component because it's going to come up again and again in like all of our panels. Is that ultimately research should be for people, like research is for. We can say that there's this like very sort of sterile idea that research is for just the advancement in general of information. I guess we could say that that's true, but I genuinely believe that for the most part, research should be done for the betterment of humans, for the betterment of understanding so that we can make improvements and so we can move forward. So Marcus, can you speak to how the research on understanding the chemistry of smoke has to do with public health, how it can increase accessibility, how we can look at novel products, like how does understanding this chemistry help us?
Sure. I do want to point out at the beginning, there was always the question, how does your background as a consumer inform your research? She has not asked me that. So, which leads to the point. So I have very little understanding of cannabis consumption. So I need the chemistry and the numbers to figure out how this thing works.
He's not a stoner, is what he's saying.
Marcus keeps us straight. All right, keep going.
I'm the boring guy. So as Miyabi alluded to, just because we think it's not the best way to consume or the healthiest way to consume, it's happening. So we should at least look at it, what is happening in reality and not just what we would like to be in a perfect system. So we should look at it and understand what happens. And from the research we have been doing over the last few years, there's a lot of counterintuitive things we find. You go in with your expectations, your perceptions. You know that cannabis behaves this way, or if you ask people, like if you ask a random person in the store, what do they want? They want high THC, and they like the beginning of their joint. And when you measure it, at the beginning of the joint is the least THC they inhale. So these two data points do not square. So, but we wouldn't have known if we wouldn't have measured it, because everyone tells you the beginning of the joint, that's the best part. But the most THC they inhale at the end, like the last little puffs of your joint, it's like 3 times as much THC as you get at the beginning. So if you really care about just the pure THC and nothing else, then you should like the Roggen, like the thing you throw away.
Because it recondenses.
Yes.
It doesn't make it all the way to the end. Or not all of it does.
And we've all seen that oil building up towards the end of our roach, and it makes sense why it's higher THC, but we didn't have this data until Marcus researched it and shared it with the world to say, hey, you'll get more lit if you smoke roaches. Yeah. And that is applicable research.
Generation joints, generation blunts. Yeah. Like this has been for a while that we know that hits different. But it is good to understand the chemistry of how, because understanding all these different molecules and how the ratios of them change. And for example, like I really like aged products. I like products that have been aged for years. And we still have a very limited understanding of the differences of all of these chemical diversities and how those chemistries go to affect us. And the more that we can understand that, and the more that we can sort of not necessarily control the plant in the sense of like making a plant or forcing the plant to do something, rather just like understand what is the best environment to grow a plant in that then leads to the best therapeutic benefit, or maybe even a more specific therapeutic benefit as a combination of genetics, as a combination with, so not just the genetics, but like how it's grown, and then how it's dried, how it's cured, or how it's processed, right? Maybe it's fresh frozen.
And I think that's a really good question for Allison for Science of Smokability. Allison is an amazing cultivator. She's cultivating the plants that we use for these studies. How do we go about controlling for as many variables as we can when we're dealing with a complex natural plant product?
It is very complex. And, to study this flower that we're smoking, it really just has to be from the same batch.
Yeah.
What we're running through the smoking machine, the different treatments we're applying, it needs to be in the same batch, the same small chamber, because depending on how you dry it, how you cure it, did it have stress the second week of flower, all of those things can manipulate the quality and what's in there in the flower. And so having those growing points very stringent and concise, optimized, moving that into drying and curing and keeping that very consistent, then making our joints, that's what gives us reliable data for then the smoking machine to take over and chemistry to kick in.
There are so many factors. Even, I'm sure many of us know, the way you roll, the tightness of that roll, the particle size, which Marcus has done research on in the past. Marcus, would you mind talking about how some of these factors like particle size might influence the way something's smoked, or maybe things we don't think about impacting smoke as much, but may play a role?
Sure. We are at the beginning, so like there are some basic things we start looking at, and everywhere we look, we find new interesting things. So as you see, alluded to particle size. When you grind your flour at home or you break it up, then there's a mixture of particle sizes and you package it, and that is good. We actually did some qualitative studies, and we found that people preferred a mixed particle size joint over a single particle size, but we are very slowly catching up, because in industrial manufacturing, you can't just break it up by hand, or you have to have it milled, and they are making 100,000 joints a day. So you have to have some reproducibility. So we started looking at particle size and found that smaller particle size, so like if you really grind it down small, fine, it smokes much faster and it gives you more THC per puff. So if you want to get through the joint quick and you want to get all the THC quickly, small particle size might work. But then if it's a larger particle size, it burns slower, it smokes slower, more puffs, and you get less THC per puff, but you get more puffs and therefore overall more THC out. So if you want to share with friends, then maybe the large particle size will work. And we can take that information to then reprogram the production process to then make your 0.5 gram dog walker or your 1.5 gram shareable product so that it fits the right setting. And we also looked at keef rolled and oil infused joints, and I thought keef rolled wouldn't work. Like the air flows through the middle of the tube. Why would the keef on the outside of your paper have any influence on what you smoke? And I thought it was just for the angel share.
But any of us that smoked one.
But it actually turns out you inhale more THC, and it burns different. It has a different extraction efficiency. So I did not believe it. I didn't expect it, but it showed counterintuitively that keef roll joints actually give you more, however you define it. And for the oil infused joints, again, you got more THC, you had a higher extraction efficiency. They actually start behaving more like a vape cartridge than a standard joint. And then and you might think, oh, is oil infused dangerous? Is that a problem? Some toxicants stay at the same concentrations, others increased, and then others again decreased. So I'm a chemist, so I can only tell you which compounds are in there, not what they do to you. So it's either healthier or more dangerous, or it's the same. I don't know. That's that direction.
Definitely one. I've got a quick clarification question just about the particle size. So if the particle size being smaller makes sense, the surface area is smaller, you heat it a lot faster, you burn a lot faster, you get a lot more of that THC up front. So if you had a smaller particle size joint, you're saying that you'll get more THC up front. But if you had a larger particle size with that same 0.5 gram, you would get a longer, lower burning and actually deliver more THC. Is that correct?
Yes, overall. So if you get through the whole joint, you get overall more THC.
So effectively, you could have the same strain and the same flower and just grind it up differently and have a different effects profile for that 0.5 gram joint in terms of total dose that was delivered, and also just in terms of like concentration over time, because as we inhale and what we're looking at with puff topography, every time you inhale, that's a dose. The volume that you're putting inside your lungs is how much of it you're taking in. And so the more we understand about that, I think that's fascinating. I'm going to do my own personal experiment.
Well, what's cool too is so many people have been doing personal experiments. Yes. Like there's so many grinders that have inserts now that you can control that particle size. So people have preference that is linking to what Marcus is talking about without knowing that research exists, and they're able to start to link up research with how they feel. And that's really empowering to have research back up your actual lived experience, and something that our community has known but has no numbers to put behind it until recently.
Of course. I mean, old school scissor cutting too. I mean, and also like the difference in then what happens when you burn something that has been physically opened, like the different types of trimming versus the different shearing methods that can happen against the trichomes being different. So I think this is just the beginning. We have had more questions arise than anything else. Ashley, do you want to share what you think is anything interesting that you thought, like what was, or did anything surprise you?
The industry's response to our study. It's been phenomenal. it's been good. I didn't want to bash anybody in the industry for any negative or copycatting what we are doing. So there's some negative and some positive to what we're doing, but the impact of this study is going to shape standards for the industry globally. It's going to shape regulatory framework, and so we're looking for more funding, more sponsors for this study to keep going, because the more money, it's not about the money for us, but it's the money, how deep we can go into this research by funding. So if people are looking to sponsor the study, continue, we're going to keep doing this study beyond these 2 years.
Well, it's pretty much endless, the number of things and factors that you could look into to make improvements. Now, we have things that we want to prioritize because we think that they're the most important for daily consumers specifically, but it is an endless amount of things that we could continue to study with this, because it's a rabbit hole of understanding, like, how can we harness what we know about the cultivation and all those variables that you control, which thank you so much to Dr. Allison Justice for that, because if you know anything about Riley and myself, or I guess the way that I grow my plants at home, the variables of how I'm like, this turned out really, really great. And it's like, well, there's pretty much no chance that I'll reproduce that exactly the same way. And that is the point of the way that we're doing it with Science of Smokability in this collaboration and in this partnership, is to minimize those as much as we can in the cultivation and post-harvest processing parts, and then be able to make some assumptions about chemistry that we might not be able to make using big data, because even though you have big data that has a lot of different grows, a lot of different conditions, a lot of growers will actually change their conditions for specific strains. And so we are really fortunate to be able to go about it in this way, where we are using the same input materials. You're treating the plants exactly the same, and we're able to change one variable. Like, for example, nutrients is the next one that is very top of the list for us to look at.
I just want to quickly say about the funding too. We are industry funded. These experiments are industry funded. So if you're walking out of here and you see our big sign of Science of Smokability, look at the companies who are sponsoring this research, because they care about quality cannabis. And we have MSOs sponsoring it, which people feel either way about MSOs. We think that is who should be sponsoring this research.
They should care.
They care, and they have the money to support it. So, feel free to look at our other research happening there too. But I think that means a lot coming from our industry, that they're willing to put money towards this, because they know that we're going to share it back with our community, and people can actually utilize the research that we're doing. Allison, would you mind discussing some of the upcoming phases of Science of Smokability that Miyabi kind of just alluded at?
Yeah, so we did water activity first. So we wanted to understand, if water activity is different, how is that delivery, how is the temperature change, etc. Another thing we want to look at is nutrients. And the reason I say nutrients is because, while digging through the tobacco research, because that's all we have to pull from, there are actually pretty set limits and standards of the nutrients and certain cultivation and post-harvest aspects that should happen to do certain things. If you get a Marlboro cigarette here versus on the other side of the U.S., they're going to be extremely consistent, and you're going to expect the same thing every time. And so digging through that and trying to understand, well, what are they measuring? What are they going for? And through that research, we're understanding, well, a lot of it is starch to sugar conversion, and all of that happens there in post-harvest, not in cultivation. But that's something we can control, and is that something that we are anecdotally doing as the cure? Is converting that for better taste, because the cigarette industry, they'll actually add sugars to the cigarettes for better taste. And so trying to piece some of this research that's gone really deep in cigarettes and try to understand what's happening with the cannabis plant, and making some of those experimental designs around what they've seen, where we can understand what we're seeing, and cannabis is really what we're going for. So nutrients is a big one, and that's what we'll hit next.
Speaking of tobacco research, is there any insight from either you or Dr. Roggen about white ash versus black ash? And is this something we're looking at in the Science of Smokability?
Go for it.
Okay. Actually, forest fires are a pretty good place to start for this. They look at ash. So ash in forest fire research is used to determine burn temperature. So obviously no one did a nutrient flush in a forest to turn it into white ash. It's just a hotter fire. Also, When the ash is black, it means there's a lot of unburned or incomplete combusted organic material. So fats, sugars, chlorophyll, all those compounds. If it's a white ash, then it is majorly metals, inorganic metals. So magnesium, sodium, and so on. So it's so if you think that your white ash means it was a nutrient flush and all those are gone, you are just looking at sodium and magnesium. So it's like the opposite of what everyone
Well, you
believes.
can't get rid of them entirely. I mean, that's not. They're always going to be salts in the mix. That's
Right.
interesting. I didn't know that about the composition of the dark ash, though. This is why I love. I love
Yeah,
that.
it shouldn't be something not to say that a white ash would not produce a good smoke, but it's not something we should be setting our standards on. In the tobacco industry, there are added ingredients to make the ash white. And so I don't think we can set our
Let's
standards.
not go that way. Let's not go that route.
I don't
also.
think that's
Let's all
what
agree,
we're wanting
right?
to do here.
Like, no adding.
So
No.
even though it's not the focus of Science to Smokability, during our experiments, we do send out an ash color guide. So when our community is taking part in these studies, they can actually take the pre-roll, smoke it, ash it on the card, and line it up with the best color or shade of gray that it lines up with. Because a lot of people take these anecdotal things, and it does mean a lot to our community. So although it's not the priority, it's absolutely something we're looking at throughout Science of Smokability, because this is a multi-year, multi-phase experiment. So we want to be looking at these factors through everything, because we don't really know what matters yet. And I want to ask Miyabi a question.
All right, put me on the spot.
When we were setting up Science of Smokability, we were sending out these pre-rolls to people. How did we make it easier for people to be as consistent as possible when they were doing the smoke experiments at home? What are ways that we can control for consistency for people at home?
So I think one of the main things that helps the most is that we had the collaboration with the Ganjiers who helped us know how do people evaluate smoke, and we had a very it was a very basic but rounded evaluation of together in conversation between us and between other collaborations and other groups that are on the SOS study on what are the parts of the smoke that we should look at. And then you and I actually we recorded together a very short video on how we could analyze the smoke in the same way and asked and invited people to do it along with us. Now, one of the most interesting things about doing that in making it more reproducible and in showing people that we gave out little cards as well that had information on it with all the pre-rolls, we actually realized that we smoke very differently with the same pre-roll. And we would never do that because we're always sharing typically. And and how often do you actually, even if you're not sharing, have the same exact roll, the same exact strain, the same exact thing? So it was fascinating. It was interesting.
It was very
We've been smoking
interesting.
together for years.
And again, it's that trust in the researchers, because we are researching cannabis smoke, but we're not saying, hey guys, go smoke and let us know how it was. We're lighting up with you and saying, okay, everyone, light up your joint. That's what we're doing right now. We're going to smoke with you for that whole video. We're telling you when to answer questions. So it's not, us versus you. It's all of us doing this research together. And that's the community aspect of what we're doing and how it's applicable to more people.
When we were doing that, we kept accidentally saying our opinions on the video and then being like, no, we have to blind it, but we cut them out so that you all got a fresh all right, well, I think we're going to wrap up here, but I want to thank everyone for you. Do you have anything, if there's one thing that we want to say about Smokability, about what we're doing, even just broader about the mission statements, because we all represent, we represent similar priorities. Our organizations are on very similar missions on what we think the value of science is. And I would like for each of you to speak a little bit in general about science and smokability and or just that in general for all of us.
I'm going to say one of the important things is continue to be engaged in the community. In these research studies, continue to follow along with what we're doing. The research that we are conducting is very groundbreaking, but we need community participation. So please continue to follow along. I'm sure everybody knows who most of us are on the stage. Follow us on all of our social media channels so we can continue to get the feedback we need. This is going to shape the future of the global cannabis industry, and this has just begun. So thank you.
Yeah, so I'm excited to continue this journey. I'm excited to have a collaboration of a wide range of scientists. It's not just cultivation, it's not just chemistry, because this plant is chemistry. And so, taking the data starting from the seed or the clone and, having experts evaluate and really put the anecdotal understanding that the community brings and putting some data behind it where we can just make it better and more efficient and more healthy is really what we're trying to do. And we're excited to do it.
I see this study as going after two things. Forming a base understanding how this thing works, and then second, how to make it better. And we're like having this race where the goalpost is constantly accelerating away from us because we are late to the game of understanding how cannabis smoking works, because people have been smoking for way longer than we started this project. And meanwhile, while we're trying to understand a basic joint, all these infused joints and elevated products or connoisseur products are coming to the market that are of interest that we also understand, but we need the baseline. So we need to move the baseline and get the added products on there. And then we need to turn around and make everything better. So it's stressful.
It's exciting. I was just saying how it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between excitement and anxiety for some of us. So I agree that I agree that it's stressful, but also exciting because there's so much that we could do. I mean, we have so many ideas with this group. There's a lot in the future. Speaking of infused things and also just vapes, there's so much more in the inhalables category just in general that's directly applicable with cultivation, post-processing, and quality, consumer quality.
And I think what I'm really excited about this project is we're combining this rigorous, objective, chemistry-focused data with the objective user, or the subjective, with the subjective experience of the consumer. So we know that chemistry is not telling the whole story. We can't understand the full smoking experience just from looking at an HPLC or a mass spec. But if we combine that data with the consumer data of all of the experts who are using cannabis every single day and reporting back, we're actually getting a pretty good idea of what quality can be from a user experience and from a health safety perspective. And I think that's really the goal of the study.
Yeah, when it comes to the science of smokability, we deserve to have a voice in the conversation, those of us who smoke. Nothing about us without us, and we should be the ones that are driving the conversations around what is quality, what do we care about, and what else do we need to learn, because every time that we do something, every time we find something out, we're opening a million more questions. So thank you all so much, and thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.